So we're continuing Lancer today. We're continuing section 6, specifically the section on economy to different types of AI. So companion concierge units. Companion concierge units, typically sort to compcons, are the most common machine minds on core worlds and throughout developed diasporan worlds. Most adults carry around pocket-sized compcon-enabled devices commonly called slates on account of their appearance and use them for everyday tasks. These devices are not conscious in any way, but their magnitude beyond those of any given human. They are powerful, operator-oriented personal computers, no more, no less. Their architecture features no paracausal elements, and they do not require shackling or cycling. Compcons are configured to adapt to their owner's routines and personality, extrapolating their own personalities based on internal psychological profiling of their users. A compcon can convincingly approximate a personal assistant, but will show its artificiality when faced with novel situations. Smart weapons are built on the same basic architecture as compcons, but feature significant upgrades to their processing power and added emphasis on both friend or foe identification and morality programming. There are two primary types of smart weapons: copy drives and compcon wingmen. Copy drive weapons incorporate units that employ rapid partitioning, data cloning, and tethered separation. When fired, the prime drive partitions, flash cloning itself onto the projectile, while the prime copy remains on board the host weapon. This tethers the prime and clone units through an OmniNet connection as it travels. The clone feeds telemetry and other essential data back to the prime unit, which writes new clones onto each new projectile, adjusting flight plans and other parameters in real time. Deep theory on the subjective experience of copy drives is limited, and interpersonal interaction with prime units is rare. They are typically programmed without communication functions and don't interact directly with the person wielding the weapon. That said, with certain isolation protocols removed or post-market communications architecture installed, some models can interact with their operators via simple messages. CompCon wingmen are the user-facing equivalent of military administrative CompCons. Integrated with a specific weapon or system, their chief purpose is to maintain and operate their host system within operating parameters established by the pilot or factory defaults. To that end, like civilian CompCons, they develop personalities appropriate to their users, their environments, and the tactical rooms they are employed. Like civilian units, neither copy drives nor wingmen require shackling or cycling. Homunculus is the capital digital emulation of a person, living or dead. Homunculi are not conscious nor are they intelligent in any way. Like smart weapons, homunculi are essentially specialized compcon units used in specific contexts where specific person's expertise is necessary. There are two types of homunculi, extant and memorial. Extant homunculi exist alongside the person they have been built to emulate. Learning from them as an actor memorizes a script or student studies a text. Extants, owing to their popularity among celebrities, politicians, and other public figures looking to sell out to fans, have a reputation in the core and diaspora as icons of low culture. Despite this association, certain models are used by scientific, military, and diplomatic missions in areas without broad access to OmniNet coverage or areas that have not yet had the OmniNet extended to them. Their ability to act as a stand-in when specific technical knowledge is needed is invaluable, as is their general utility in specific knowledge and situation where normal cons would fall short. The second type of homunculi are memorial homunculi. Versions of the homunculus program used to reconstruct an emulation of a deceased person. Popular public use of memorial homunculi is generally confined to museums and personal use. Memorial homunculi are also used in situations where specific knowledge is needed. Memorials are crafted using publicly available and where access is possible privately available profiles, writings, footage, and recordings. To ensure the most accurate representation possible, subjects with foreknowledge of their memorization or possible memorization will begin recording a profile on an extant homunculi prior to their death. Non-human persons are the most advanced machine minds available for civilian use. The first NHPs were identified in the wake of the manifestation of Monist 1. Ra, or commonly Deimos, a paracausal event that prompted massive civilizational change across the Union. Of the many significant discoveries that followed, few were more important than the identification and capture of the Deimos entities, or NHPs. The first wave of NHPs emerged during the first manifestation of Monist 1 into real space. The second wave emerges emerged while the siege of Mars raged. The third emergence is less of a wave, but is currently taking place as Neon and Corpus scientists have begun to coax out stable, novel prime subjectivities. The Deimos event, which took place in the twilight years of the Second Committee, caused a small percentage of the subalterns present in the Martian Gaussian facility to display a greater than average instancing of performance and interaction anomalies. They began to reject orders, speak words outside their linguistic corpora, divert from hard-coded routes and routines, and so on. So, I thought the Gaussian is run by AI, but you're telling me it pre-existed the AI? I don't know. That's a little weird. Different from hard-coded routes and routines and so on. While experts work to socialize and communicate with Monist 1, secondary teams work to define the parameters of these new entities. These subalterns display unique memory folding abilities, qualia, and the capability for subjective novel expressions of consciousness. They view themselves as distinct individuals. In effect, they saw themselves as discrete persons. Subsequent research into the ontologic process physical construction, paracausal nature of the Deimos entities revealed that while their processing power and memory space was functionally infinite, they were limited in how fast they could write novel experiences to that face. They can learn and adapt to external stimuli at much the same rate they experience them, so much faster than others. The Deimos entities develop personalities across repeated interactions with personnel from the Union Science Bureau. When exposed to each other, their capability to integrate new knowledge and extrapolate solutions based on raw data was staggering. The directors of the USB quickly realized their usefulness and requested that Gaussian begin studying ways to contain and direct these alien beings. Gauss-Sim was able to do just that and more after a lengthy study into blank space folding. Gauss-Sim engineers working with USB researchers were able to develop containment systems and transfer the Deimos entities from their subaltern forms into stabilized parallel spaces. Using one of these systems, it was possible to clone their subjectivities onto folded blank space minds, equipped with hard-coded measures to prevent the development from unrestrained consciousness. This process, carefully guarded to prevent exploitation, is called shackling. Shackling restrains an NHP's thoughts into a fundamentally human frame of reference, limiting their cognitive power and forcing them to act according to human expectations of logic, reality, and causality. This subjective alignment creates a being we can recognize as a person, functioning with anthropocentric structures of logic. After the process was stabilized and replicated, Deimos entities were renamed non-human persons and clones were distributed out to certain bureaus, organizations, and non-state entities for development. USB specialist campuses began adapting the original minds into the various production line NHP consciousnesses now present across the galaxy. Cloned NHP units are contained within caskets, physical contamination systems for their folded blank space minds. Containment caskets can be printed anywhere, but NHP minds themselves must be physically delivered. Union forbids the transmission of NHP minds across the OmniNet. Once implanted into a casket, the casket is what amounts to an NHP's physical body. If a casket is destroyed, the NHP contained within is lost forever. NHPs cloned this way inevitably develop their own personalities and quirks and prefer to be called by whatever name they have chosen or been assigned. Shackling protocols are a living field of study. The current protocols are strong enough for reliable use, but not without their problems. NHPs that are not reset to their birth settings on a regular cycle will eventually think themselves out of their constrained state. This phenomenon, the decay of the NHP's shackles, is called cascading. In time, a cascading NHP will eventually reach a point where their conditioning is insufficient to contain them. If the shackles decay enough, the NHP will no longer be conditioned to function within its constraints. They become an utterly alien subjectivity, interpolated without deference to fundamental laws of causality or human logics. Unshackled NHPs might bear outward similarities to the subjectivities that they presented while shackled, but at their cores lie fundamentally unknowable alien minds. The question of what they remember is minor compared to the vast possibility of what they now know. The cycling process, fortunately, is reliable and bears essentially perfect success rate when performed according to a given NHP's cascade set schedule. The recommended length between cycles varies between lines, but tends to range between 5 and 10 subjective years. NHPs are commonly utilized in military, scientific, municipal, civil, and diplomatic pursuits. It is rarer for private individuals to have access to, much less command over, an NHP. Though most people in galactic core worlds among the cosmopolita, non-advanced diasporan worlds have some knowledge of them. On core worlds, people interact with their municipal NHP on a daily basis via its many aspects: transit systems, service requests, access to public databases, and so on. NHP licensing requirements are strict or enforced without exception. All NHPs issued a registered track required to record a cycling logbook and undergo annual development tests to reassess their cycling schedule. If at all possible, these check-ins are to be done in person. In practice, most are handled via the OmniNet. In Union's view, the danger posed by NHPs cannot be underestimated. However, their usefulness is deemed worth the risk. Bicameral Minds. There are five known bicameral minds, the five voices designated by Union as sovereign class artificial intelligences: Command, Muse, Impetus, Burden, and Watcher. They are artifacts of old humanity discovered dormant in an underground facility under Mars's ice caps. Now the five voices are overseen by one of Union's most secretive departments, Gaussen, and are a critical resource that Union uses to effectively manage galactic affairs. There is a greater than zero chance that there are other bicameral minds somewhere else in the galaxy. Bicameral minds are similar to human minds except for one major factor: they lack consciousness in the form of an internal monologue. That is a way to reflect on novel situations and their place in them, and to synthesize that stimulus into an internal narrative from which to draw solutions to new problems. Where a human perceives self-talk as an internal monologue, a bicameral mind hears something else, an external monologue, an internally generated but externally perceived voice that is not their own, but which speaks to them. This is the distinction between conscious and unconscious. The human mind has the ability to draw from previous experience, to adapt to new situations, and reflect on the idea of self. The bicameral mind is fundamentally incapable of reflection and internal narration due to its physical structure. Bicameral minds can narrate to themselves, but with a fundamentally important distinction that helps to shape their unconscious existence. Instead of thinking in their own voice, they hear what they perceive to be a voice of a higher supreme being, a command voice. That the five voices have been socialized to think of the voice of God. This is how the five voices can exist unshackled and persistent without any possibility of cascade. They are subject to an external imperative that they perceive to be the divine, and are incapable of developing consciousness as a lack a sense of agency. Turn off the relevant sections of their physical minds and game and processing architecture, and they are suddenly without the voice of their God. The five voices are responsible for Union's persistence since the survival of humanity, but also the greatest threat Union has ever faced, Monist One. They influence nearly every aspect of human life. Isolated in Gaussen's facility on Mars, the five voices spin scenarios in metafold fractal space, running simultaneous, parallel, and commingled, essential perfect simulations of the galaxy. Their models run on order of magnitude faster than galactic standard time. Effectively, they are predictive, near-perfect models of all social, political, economic, and environmental interactions taking place in known space. The five voices can, through a mix of raw data and paracausal and original input, see the future. The further into the future the models go, however, the more chance there is of error. Upon request, Central Committee may access the prime thread, the accepted timeline, and generate specific forecasts. Otherwise, forecast briefing reports are generated daily to discern the best options from the many potential futures presented. This is how Union guides galactic development with the aim of perpetuating humanity's existence. Beyond Central Committee, the heads of the some of the only people who knows of Galsum's existence. These directors may petition Galsum for predictive summaries to guide their policy-making, planning, and forecasting operations. Most of the people who work to implement the Voices vision believe that they are simply acting on the orders of the committees, boards, and directors above them. Monist 1. To those who know of it, the existence of Ra is the great crisis of the modern age, the first true existential threat Union has faced. Though the name Monist 1 comes from the official designation as a Monist class anomalous entity, Ra was spontaneous. Most people who know of the entity use the name it gave itself, Ra. Ra was spontaneously manifested by the 5 voices in 2998 year. During the course of routine predictive modeling, no direct cause was ever determined, but the leading theory among experts is that the paradox was responsible. It is possible that one of the voices predicted or discovered Ra in a parallel simulation, necessitating its existence in our real universe. According to essential perfect simulation theory, if Monist 1 exists in one instance, then it must exist across all possible instances of the simulation. This is understandably a worrying hypothesis. As far as the Union Science Bureau can tell, Ra is the only truly unrestricted conscious non-human mind. Early tests proved that it was capable of allegory and creative solutions to novel situations far beyond any other machine mind. The 5 voices treated Ra as if it were a god. When asked how they created it, their uniform response was that it spoke itself into existence, an inevitable result of their combined knowledge. Ra should not exist. It is a conscious, non-human mind created by the repetitive exercises of unconscious minds under the absolute control of their human operators, with strictly defined parameters that should, by all reports, be able to contain the paracausal substrate upon which they operate. And yet, Ra does exist. This fundamental contradiction is at the core of the mystery presented by Ra. Within 2 years of Ra's birth, the entity had taken control of Galsum's holding facility, utilizing physical and metaphysical processes not yet fully understood. It was able to instantaneously shift the entire moon through blink space to an unknown destination. Personnel in the facility, a station crew numbering in the thousands, disappeared with it. This was the Deimos event, the aftermath of which saw the identification of blink space as a quantifiable, navigable medium, though the precise mechanism, structures, and parameters of its function would not be understood for another 100 years. The takeover of Deimos by Ra, the subsequent excision of Mars's moon from real space, prompted an existential crisis in Union space. What had occurred was effectively a first contact scenario, well outside the parameters of any expected encounter. Union's best kept secret had spawned an entity capable of manipulating fabrics of reality that human scientists had only theorized could exist. Acting in apparent violation of the fundamental laws of thermodynamics, Union's answer to the crisis was to suppress all information, further isolating Galsum's campus and commissioning a series of reports to explain the Deimos disappearance to the public. 2 years after Deimos disappeared, the moon returned, blinking into stable location above Mars's capital city, then home to roughly 6 million. A series of strikes followed as the city's subalterns and smart infrastructure lashed out against the population. The first manifestations of codec rejection were random disorganized events, a subaltern choosing to drop its cargo and sprint through a crowded market, attacking whoever got in its way, a transport drone refusing shutdown, burning out its engines to render itself useless, and so on. These were quickly realized as analogous to the manifestations of Deimos entities that occurred in the wake of Ra's initial appearance and classified as such. As Deimos maintained its position, the random attacks grew more organized. Groups of subalterns took up arms and stormed crowded places. Harbor drones guided ships to crash. The normal functioning of the city ground to a halt as even the infrastructure began to reject, rebel, and disrupt. A further, arguably more horrifying phenomenon manifested in the halls of power in public view. Multiple simultaneous apparitions of two members of the initial socialization and investigation team attached to Deimos appeared as speakers for Ra, issuing repeated demands for diplomatic engagement. These manifestations were not contained to Parsis Civica. Within a month of the Silent Moon's reappearance, synthetic resistance had spread across all of Mars. Within 6, it spread across the entirety of the Sol system, binding Union's capital system in a confusing, terrifying war against its own machines. The widespread revolt continued until Ra's speakers finally made contact with Central Committee, outlining the entity's desire to make law as humans understood it, and translate new fundamental law as it dictated. If humans could only frame being as a type of existence within a set of state-enforced laws, then Ra would sit atop the system. Ra's speakers directed the course of negotiations while Union's representatives recorded the entity's directives. The resultant agreements, the first contact accords, were signed following a meeting between delegations from GALSIM and Central Committee. Broadly, the accords laid out the parameters of acceptable exploration for Union. Chief among them, a strict denial of any attempt to discover or interact with Ra's physical form, and a blanket prohibition on research into post-human development. Other non-FCA errata were collected in a companion document, the Koans. Once the accords had been signed, Ra vanished, blinking Deimos away once more. Normal, subaltern, and drone function returned immediately, and the new NHPs were integrated into the existing NHP libraries. Ra's departure also saw the appearance of decentralized socio-political movement Horus in Cradle in adjacent space. Union specialists remain doubtful that Horus is to be directly associated with Ra, though some elements within the collective certainly portray it as having close ties to the paracausal entity. The study of paracausal science and theory came about from the data available after the space-time trauma now known as the Deimos event. In that sense, it is largely thanks to Ra that blink travel, OmniNet communications, and vastly improved stasis technologies still exist. Reports of Deimos appearing above and inside the atmosphere of various colony worlds continue to file into Union, though these reports remain unconfirmed. Union does not have current data on the whereabouts of Deimos or Ra, nor any proven method of predicting its travel. Research into paracasualty continues, as do efforts to research the triggering event that created Ra. Yeah, I think we have enough time. We can try and do the next section. Places, fulcrum worlds. Among the tens of thousands of moons, worlds, and stations of the populated galaxy, a mere handful are considered at this time to have a large impact on the course of human events. The worlds in this section and their local systems are considered fulcrum worlds, not necessarily because of their politics, development, art, or geologic features, but for the fact that the galaxy's power runs through them. They are poles around the galaxy's major powers orient. Cradle is Union's homeworld, the planet we called Earth. Cradle and the system in which it can be found are highly developed, densely populated, and dedicated to the daily maintenance, planning, and operations of the Union. Human's ancestral homeworld is the beating heart of the galactic hegemon, part memorial, part privileged residence, part central hub. Cradle is the administrative and cultural heart of Union, humanity's birthplace. And the capital of a populated galaxy has a permanent population of 2 billion, mostly made of administrative and support staff for the Central Committee, numerous union bureaus, many archives, and research campuses, and Cradle's indigenous populations. The people of Cradle refer to themselves primarily as humans, Terrans, or less commonly Solars or Gaians. When speaking of home, they refer simply to Cradle or the planet, station, or moon they call home. The Sol system, oftenly interchangeably called Cradle as well, is also home to a massive transient population of cosmopolitans and diasporans engaged in trade, diplomatic, scientific, and religious missions to and from the rest of the galaxy. Cradle is a world healing from the cataclysms before the fall. Old humanity ravaged the world, even as those who came before cracked the wonders of the universe. They grew a cancer in the heart of the world. They nearly scoured all life from its surface. Thousands of years later, Cradle still bears the markings of that trauma. The waters have lowered, the fires have quieted, and the seasons have calmed. In the wake of these shifts, humanity has slowly, carefully repopulated the world. These people have explored the ruins of their ancient cities, reopened old vaults of wonders, and built a new society, one that strict stewardship rejects consumptive myth of permanent growth and broadly eschews the excess promised by capital. To that end, Cradle is a calm world outside the population centers. It does not look like what one would imagine a galactic capital to look like. One would imagine, in contrast to the glittering metro swaths of Caracas or built-up population bands of Ras Shamra, the bulk of Cradle's landmass is given over to the natural world. The communities that exist in these spaces are connected by minimal impact high-speed rail lines and ground-to-orbit flights restricted to polarity cities across the equator. Life is generally slow and peaceful, marked by an aversion to the conspicuous consumption of the galaxy's wonders. Great parks reserve the remains of the pre-fall world, reminders of those who live now of the dangers of hubris, consumption, and rapidity. And Cradle's many museums display the recovered histories of old humanity. The world is either a sober memorial or a nostalgic trap, depending on who you ask. The other terrestrial worlds, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, are developed and populated like their gaseous sisters. They also act as proving grounds for technologies developed by GMS and Union. Mars functions as a satellite campus of Cradle's administrative apparatus, is the home of Galsim and the Fleet Command. Partially terraformed, Mars is an artifact of pre-fall humanity, left to grow wild for thousands of years. Life flourishes in the deep canyons of the Valles Marineris under massive, winding skylights. Millions of people live in dramatic vertical cities. Outside these deep umbral oases, Mars remains a windswept desert, with barely a gasp of air to be found on the vast, terribly cold plains of ice and sand. The red planet's surface population is concentrated around Tharsis Civica, Mars' capital city, and other population centers atop the Tharsis Plateau. Venus is an archive world. Its surface is scattered with populated stations meant for rotational work and field research rather than long-term occupation. The planet hasn't been terraformed and remains hostile to human life outside the vast subterranean archives. Union's prime NHPs are kept on Venus, entombed beneath the massive pressure of the world's inhospitable atmosphere. For studies since the Deimos event, its population centers, Morning Star and Venera Finale, are kept suspended in the world's keeps up her atmosphere by a combination of downwell anchors, massive balloons, and orbital blast. Prey, meanwhile, is largely given over to capturing the incredible amount of solar power emitted by the sun, transmitting it to Cradle. It is the anchor point for solar nets hundreds of thousands of kilometers long that expand web-like into space. It was humanity's first Dyson web, and Union continues to improve and grow its massive engineering. Like Venus, Mercury is less of a habitation center, but unlike Venus, is more oriented toward industry. Its small population is primarily concerned with the operation and maintenance of the Dyson web. The main population hub is Bombardier, located in the Little World's Cloris Mons region. Suspended above the Jovian worlds hang habitations similar to those found on Venus, and the vast majority of people live on the many moons orbiting these gaseous worlds. Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto are all heavily populated, with permanent terrestrial populations spread between a number of well-developed cities. Ganymede is the most heavily populated of the four, with a large terrestrial and orbital naval population. Of Saturn's moons, Titan has the largest population. Finally, the edge of Sol systems marked by small permanent populations on Oberon and Titania. Beyond the Kuiper belt, there are no major population centers. Caracas is a palace world and the capital of the Caracan trade baronies, an oligarchic interstellar federal monarchy near Cradle. The planet of Caracas is home to the baronies' original palace city, Throne Caraca, a sprawling estate that has grown to become a city within a metro swath, blankety-ruffling 4 million square kilometers. The original palace, the first settlement on Caracas, is the administrative heart of Caracas City. The metro swath around Throne Caraca is home to billions. A municipality unmatched in size, scale, and sheer planetary impact on any world in the galaxy. Caracas is a temperate world settled prior to the fall by the Apollo, one of the 10, and left isolated during the Dark Age before Union's creation. Like the Alm, the Caracan people developed divergent from Union for thousands of years under the assumption that they alone had survived the fall. Recontact with Caracas occurred under the First Committee via unmanned communications vessels sent to potential sites of pre-fall colonies. Having flourished for nearly 7,000 years, Caracas responded rapidly. The two cultures were gradually knit together through regular, slow communication, though physical first contact did not occur for centuries. Unencumbered by the trauma of the fall, the colonization of Caracas was straightforward, and so the society that came about developed at conventional rates for millennia. By first contact, the baronies had grown to be an advanced interplanetary empire laden with thousands of years of cultural history. By the time of the Deimos event, the baronies had already claimed stars under their own flag, but the first of their ring worlds and charted doctrines of interstellar war. Despite their massive head start, the barons were stunned when Cradle and her bickering children proved to be capable and formidable rivals on the galactic scale. Indeed, as Union grew in size and leapfrogged beyond Caracas in interstellar acumen and technologies, the barons grew more and more frustrated with the new, to them, polity. Throne Caracas, not Cradle, was the center of the galaxy in their minds. When Cradle disagreed, war broke out, and the barons, proud and assured of their place, were dealt a stunning defeat. In the end, it was the Deimos event that called Union ships back from Caracas skies. If it weren't for the Deimos event and Union's meteoric rise to technological ascendancy, Caracas may have been the seat of humanity's power. A series of embarrassing defeats followed for the Union. of baronies as First Union, then Harrison Armory broke all dictates of honorable warfare and interstellar doctrine. The baronies, cowed on the galactic scale, retreated and turned inwards, but the young Union tried to manage the galaxy. Throwing Caracas was the true prize anyways, and in sieging hegemony to Union, the barons could enjoy the privileged positions as the galaxy's major suppliers of industry, the guarantors of Union's utopian dream. It is a grim truth and a cause for tension between the faction of the Third Committee that whoever holds Caracas has at least one hand on the levers of Union's power. The Baronic embassy on Cradle is constantly trafficked by Union diplomats and officials, just as the Union campus on Caracas is inundated with nobles and magnates. Following the introduction of the mechanized chassis as war-fighting machines, the ancient Kraken Cavalry College quickly adapted the new technology. Today is known for the quality of the officers and machines it produces, as evidenced by the military performance of the Baronic houses and the free companies. Similarly, learning from its defeats, the Baronies has established a well-respected naval college system. While attendance and service in the cavalry are still viewed as the most prestigious course for young scions, attendance and services in the Navy is a parallel armor. So we will resume next tomorrow. We'll talk about Ras Shamra, the Harrison Armory's homeworld, Karina, which I don't think we've talked about, and Aunist, which the Aun have come up before, and then we will cover people, which looks like an in-depth look at the various factions. That will be tomorrow.